Давайте попробуем разобраться, в чем разница между языковыми уровнями и по каким критериям определяют тот или иной уровень на международных экзаменах и на собеседованиях. Сегодня рассмотрим только один параметр– устную речь. И я попробую привести несколько примеров, чтобы вы смогли оценить, на каком уровне находитесь именно вы. И почему иногда вы причисляете себя к одному уровню, а по факту начинать заниматься с вами нужно на один или на два уровня ниже, а иногда и вовсе с самого начала. Относительно реакции некоторых людей на оценку уровня я попытаюсь привести как отрицательные примеры, так и положительные, чтобы вы на контрасте смогли увидеть, что не так и что, собственно, нужно делать. Начну с реальной истории. Лет 10-12 назад приходит ко мне девушка и говорит: «Я не сдала международный экзамен. Прошла чтение и аудирование, но завалила письмо и говорение». По ее словам, на письме ее поставил в тупик чистый лист бумаги и необходимость изъясниться на тему, к которой она вообще была не готова. А на говорении нужно было говорить как в монологе, так и в диалоге на тему «Моя любимая комната». И у нее вообще не получилось ничего сказать. Она просто не поняла ни как разговор начать, ни какие вопросы собеседнику задавать, ни как полноценный рассказ построить, и все это в разных грамматических временах. Я говорю: хорошо, есть такая технология, когда мы берем одну конкретную тему и идем из прошлого через настоящее в будущее, оставаясь в контексте повествования конкретно этой темы, ни в коем случае не переключаясь ни на что другое. И чтобы посмотреть на ее уровень и не подсказывать, в каких временах она должна говорить, в прошлом, в настоящем и в будущем, я дал ей пример структуры повествования от ее лица на данную тему. Пока на русском. Мой первый пример является очень простым упражнением из базовой риторики, и он был посвящен именно структуре повествования, чтобы было понятно, как именно думать на ту или иную тему и не растеряться, особенно когда попадается какая-нибудь тема, к которой вы не готовы и которая вообще ничего общего не имеет с вашей жизнью. Мой пример от ее лица звучал приблизительно так. Когда я была маленькая, я жила в доме своих родителей, и у меня была своя отдельная комната. Там было все, что мне было необходимо на тот момент. Она всегда была завалена игрушками, и мои друзья приходили ко мне в любое время дня и ночи. В общем, счастью не было предела. Но чем старше я становилась, тем больше мои вкусы начали отличаться от вкусов моих родителей. Поэтому, когда я поступила в университет и переехала на новое место, это был как глоток свежего воздуха, который был необходим на тот момент. Эйфория прошла очень быстро, так как мне пришлось делить комнату с другими студентками, и были ограничения. И здесь идет описание комнаты и в квартире или общежитии, или описание отдельной квартиры. Уже тогда я приложила все усилия, чтобы оказаться там, где я нахожусь сегодня, а сегодня у меня такая-то профессия, я работаю там-то, часто переезжаю и могу позволить себе арендовать такое-то жилье. Но также чувствую некие ограничения, не могу сделать такой ремонт, который мне хотелось бы, завести такую-то мебель, которую мне хотелось бы, и делать это так часто, как мне хотелось бы. Поэтому в данный момент я работаю над тем, чтобы в ближайшем будущем приобрести такую-то квартиру в таком-то районе, сделать такой-то ремонт и закупить такую-то мебель. Собираюсь начать реализацию этого проекта через 2 года, так как необходимо скопить нужную сумму. А было бы здорово поработать с таким-то архитектором, чтобы спроектировать дом именно для меня, и с таким-то дизайнером, чтобы реализовать такие-то идеи и сделать там и любимую комнату, и любимый этаж. Данный пример помогает структурировать речь и дает возможность адаптировать любую тему под тот временной лимит экзамена или собеседования, которые вам обозначили. Хоть 3 минуты, хоть полчаса. Причем это работает как в устной форме, так и в письменной. Вы также можете пользоваться той структурой повествования, которую вам демонстрировали в школе на уроках русского языка и литературы. Начало, завязка, кульминация, развязка, конец. Но проблема с этой структурой заключается только в том, что она у многих на автомате ассоциируется только со случившимися событиями. То есть те, кто пользуется такой структурой, могут изъясняться по поводу прошлого, более-менее по поводу настоящего и вообще не в состоянии говорить о будущем. То, что показал я, более применимо как базовое упражнение при устной отработке грамматических конструкций не только прошлого и настоящего, но и будущего. Каждое из времен также можно разбавлять различными приемами из базовой риторики, типа тезиса, аргумента и следствия, но это намного интереснее слушать непосредственно в процессе обучения, а еще интереснее этим сразу пользоваться. Вернемся к параметрам оценки вашего уровня. Как вы понимаете, изъясниться на любую тему можно по-разному. Как ученик начальной школы, как старшеклассник, как выпускник вуза. Можно кратко, можно очень детально и объемно. Если коротко, то в рамках одной короткой встречи вас всегда оценивают по используемой грамматике, активному словарному запасу, темпу речи и логике изложения. Если демонстрировать визуально, то вот так можно показать разницу между уровнями с точки зрения изучаемых грамматических времен. Так выглядит то количество грамматических времен, которое вы должны освоить на самом базовом начальном уровне. Так выглядит элементарный уровень. Это уровень ниже среднего. Это средний уровень. Это выше среднего. А это продвинутый уровень. И здесь на этот слайд нужно смотреть уже с полным пониманием активного и пассивного залогов, а также со знанием того, как активные и пассивные залоги используются в простых и в продолжительных временах. Поэтому, чтобы определить чей-то уровень, достаточно дать ему тему и попросить изъясниться на эту тему, не давая никаких дальнейших четких указаний, так как должно быть автоматически понятно, что если вы качественно освоили материал того или иного уровня, то это означает, что вы в состоянии физически разговаривать в грамматических и лексических рамках заявляемого вами уровня. Давайте приведу пример. Я тестирую студентов, давая довольно-таки простые темы, но чем проще тема, тем чаще вижу ступор при попытке изъясниться. Практически никогда не вижу четкой структуры повествования, употребления времен, предусмотренных тем или иным уровнем, и логического перехода от одного времени к другому. Давайте возьмем тему «машина» и посмотрим, как может выглядеть повествование на эту тему в монологе от моего лица. Моя задача заключается в том, чтобы продемонстрировать речь в рамках того или иного уровня, используя грамматические времена и словарный запас, с которым знакомится абсолютно каждый студент. Я ничего не должен выдумывать, я просто озвучиваю реальность в разных объемах грамматики и словарного запаса. Так может звучать рассказ на тему «машина» в рамках начального уровня. Максимально просто, буквально несколько предложений в каждом времени, но в корректных формах. When I was a child, we didn't have a car. We used public transport. My father was a driver, but he worked in a hospital and he never used hospital cars. Today I have a car and it's very simple and cheap because it's my first car. It's Volkswagen Polo and I like it. I hardly ever use public transport and I usually drive every day. In the future I would buy a Volkswagen too because I like this brand. I'm going to buy Tiguan in 2 or 3 years. Так может звучать рассказ на тему «машина» в рамках элементарного уровня. Предложений может быть уже больше, но это все еще максимально просто. We have never had a car. When I was a child, my father was a driver and he worked in a hospital. It was more interesting for me to go to his garage where I could play with different car parts and broken cars. When I was in upper classes, I went to a driving school and I got my first driving license at the age of 16. It was really cool and I was very happy. I could drive cars and ride motorbikes. Today, I live in Moscow and I drive a very simple car. It's Volkswagen Polo. It's very simple to park and it's very cheap to service. In Moscow, there are a lot of crazy drivers and it's very useful to practice in heavy traffic of a big city and in motorways. In the future, I would buy a little bit bigger car. It would be something like Tiguan. Unfortunately, I'm not going to do this quickly. I'm going to wait for a couple of years. Так может звучать рассказ на тему «машина» в рамках уровня, который ниже среднего. Детализация выше, грамматических времен больше, рисуемая картинка интереснее. When I was a child, I used to live in my grandmother's village and it was one of the most beautiful places I've ever seen. Although my father was a driver, we didn't have our own car. He worked in a hospital and he was busy all the time. I used to come to his garage very often because I really liked the atmosphere there. My father's colleagues were very good to me and I was allowed to play with different car parts and I could sit in every car which was broken down. I remember the first time behind the wheel. I was 6 years old, it was summer, and as always I came to the garage. There were a couple of men who were standing in front of one of the cars. They were in the middle of a conversation and they were laughing. Once they saw me, they said hello and my father invited me to join him. It turned out he had just repaired the car and he needed to test it. As you understand, I was too little and I couldn't see anything from the driver's seat. I just couldn't push the pedals and control the speed, so I had to sit out on my father's lap. I was controlling the wheel and he was controlling the rest of the car. That way we drove 20 kilometers and for me it was just unforgettable. I was very lucky to get to a driving school when I was in upper classes. It was really exciting to learn how to drive small cars and big trucks. I also had a chance to learn how to ride motorbikes. Getting my first license just after school at the age of 16 was a little torture for me because I couldn't use it. After becoming a student, I didn't have any money and of course I didn't have any time. Nowadays, I live in Moscow and I've been driving my own car since 2017. I didn't want to buy a used car, so I bought a new one, but without any loans. It's a very simple car, which is really easy to park, which is very simple to service, and whose insurance is not exorbitant. I'm talking about Volkswagen Polo. It's not the first car I drive, but it's the first car I own. Now I know the difference between being able to drive a car and being responsible for driving a car. Now I know the difference between buying a car and possessing a car, which means that I have to service it on time, I have to prepare it to winter and summer conditions on time, I have to pay for my insurance on time, I have to choose correct petrol on time, I have to repair it in case of an accident if I want to keep driving. I think I have already had enough time of driving a simple car, so in the future I would be really happy to buy a bigger and more powerful car. I'm not going to do this immediately because of two reasons. First of all, my current car is in a very good condition, and second of all, there are so many new cars on the market nowadays that I need some more time to get some more information about them all. I will probably have to wait for a while, a couple of years, not longer, but I'm thinking about Tiguan. And if I decide to buy a new car, I will definitely start with test drives, and if I like something, I will try to do my best to pay for it in cash. Of course, if I didn't have any financial limitations, it would be Lexus NX because it has always been my dream. But I shouldn't get crazy and I should definitely buy a car which I could enjoy while driving and which could be not so expensive for me at the same time. Так может звучать рассказ на тему машина в рамках среднего уровня. Уровень детализации еще выше из-за нового словарного запаса, который касается конкретно транспорта, но новых грамматических структур не так уж и много по сравнению с предыдущим уровнем. My father has been an ambulance driver since I remember myself. But he has never had his own car. That's why when I was a child, I used to spend really a lot of time in his garage at work. I was allowed to play with all the car parts I could find and physically move, and I could also do whatever I wanted to do with every car which wasn't in working order, of course, except damaging any of them. I used to play inside, coming up with different games and discovering every part of every car. But just because of the fact that I was alone, I also really liked going through instruction manuals. Turning over pages with technical drawings really fascinated me. I wasn't able to read at that time, so I used to ask really a lot of questions about cars. My father and his colleagues were really patient with me. They were always very good to me. They were really happy to see me every single time, and they were over the moon answering questions about their working routine. I remember one summer when I was 6 years old. It was my last free summer before going to school. I came to the garage during the lunch break and I saw my father standing in front of one of the cars with some colleagues. They were having a conversation about the time they had spent repairing that car. Everyone looked quite happy, and once they realized that I was there, everyone said hello and they smiled at me. My father gave me a hug and he invited me to join him for a test drive. It took me 5 seconds to get into the car, which made everyone laugh. After a couple of minutes, we were driving along the village where we used to live at that time. The village wasn't really small, but it wasn't very big either. There were a couple of dozens of streets with a couple of thousands of residents, and of course there were a lot of children running around. We left the village and we drove onto the nearest motorway. 5 minutes later, we finally got to a real agricultural field where there weren't any other cars, any pedestrians, and any speed limits. My father stopped the car and I changed my seat. As you understand, I was too little to be able to push the pedals, and I was too weak to be able to manipulate the gear stick of the car with manual transmission. So I had to sit on his lap. We set off. I was looking ahead and I was steering the wheel and he was changing gears and controlling our speed. That way we drove 20 kilometers, which I'll never be able to forget. In upper classes, I got lucky to get a place in a driving school where I could learn to ride motorbikes and drive cars and trucks. It was a quite intense period of life for an ordinary pupil like me, because I had to go there at weekends and on some days during the week, but after school. On the one hand, it was very interesting, but on the other hand, I was exhausted and I didn't have any free time at all. But after a couple of years of theoretical classes and practical drills, I passed all the exams and I got my first driving license, which I didn't even celebrate because I also turned into a poor student without any time and money. At the moment, I live in one of the coolest and most beautiful places I've ever visited, which is Moscow. And it's also one of the biggest and craziest cities I've ever seen, which means that you have to be whether a skilled driver to feel safe behind the wheel or rich to be able to solve any problem which you can potentially get on the road. Since 2017, I've been driving a very simple and affordable car because honestly, I'm still practicing to follow all the road rules in such heavy traffic of this giant city. In spite of the fact that you have to know and follow all the local road rules, you have to learn to predict other people's actions on the road. It may sound funny and even stupid, but it's a multinational place, which means that there might be really a lot of people from really a lot of different places who don't respect any local rules. My Volkswagen Polo is a very simple car, which is really easy to park. But every time I park it, I should occupy a parking space really carefully without leaving some extra space for bikers, who can easily scratch it trying to push their motorbikes between my car and somebody else's car. And I don't have to occupy too much space to avoid tow trucks in action or a fine. My Polo is a very simple car, but every time I have to service it, I have to be really careful choosing a car repair shop. Because in some places there are good mechanics with all needed skills, and in some places there are good marketing managers with really basic mechanical skills. Some shops charge for their services, and some shops charge for their location. It takes time to find real professionals who care. My Polo is a very simple car, but if I'm stuck in a traffic jam, there might be a chance to meet some really tired and emotionally unstable people with unpredictable outlook on life who can easily cause an accident and damage my car. Even if it's not my fault, I just have to be ready to get a higher bill from my insurance company next year. My Polo is a very simple car which helps me to develop paranormal abilities like reading people's minds and planning my budget without having a decent business. In the future, I would be really happy to buy a bigger and more powerful car. I would need it not only to be able to get around, but to be able to get around with my instrument. The thing is, I play drums, and it would be more convenient to have a car with more space for my instruments and for my bandmates, and more horses to be able to drive safely with more weight and with more passengers. I'm going to test a couple of cars in the nearest future. It will probably be very difficult to choose something because every car company produces new makes so quickly that you don't have enough time to think. Of course, if I find something I like, I'll start saving money to buy it, and if I can make it without any loan programs, I'll be the happiest person on the planet. If I could buy a Lexus NX, I would be really happy because I really like this car. But even they changed this car so fast that I would prefer some previous generations to modern ones. Anyway, I should stay sane and I should buy an affordable car which I'll be able to maintain. Actually, I should have bought Lexus NX as my first car. If I had done this in 2017, I would have saved really a lot of money and I would have been able to enjoy driving my favorite car. Так может звучать рассказ на тему машина в рамках уровня, который выше среднего. Новые грамматические времена, новые конструкции, новый уровень детализации. Being a child before going to school was one of the best periods of my life, and recalling it makes me feel happy every single time. I used to live in my grandmother's village, which had been built after the Second World War. I remember living among very good people in a very beautiful place, being surrounded by 400 hectares of different gardens. We didn't have a car because we didn't need it at that time. Traveling around the world wasn't popular yet, and traveling around the country was predominantly planned by organizations where people worked. And people used to go on their holidays by buses and trains. That is why walking and riding a bike was completely enough when you lived in a small village like mine. My father has been an ambulance driver since I remember myself, and when I was a child, I used to spend really a lot of time in his garage, where I was always welcomed even if he wasn't there. I would usually come there in the second part of the day when it wasn't so hot, and I was allowed to play with all the filthy car parts which I was able to move. By the way, there were some safety rules. I couldn't touch any electrical tools, I had to wear a uniform with gloves, and I had to keep every car clean. But in general, my father's colleagues treated me like a pal, although they threatened me every time somebody mentioned alcohol or cigarettes. They just didn't want me to start. One day I came to the garage and I saw my father talking to some colleagues. He had just repaired one old car and he was waiting for me so we could test it together. I got into the car and we set off. We had been driving for about 10 minutes when we finally got to a real agricultural field. There weren't any pedestrian areas, any cycle lanes, any traffic lights, any speed limits, and of course there weren't any people around. It was a perfect place for an unpredictable test drive. My father got out of the car, checked every wheel, opened the hood and checked the engine and the exhaust system. Everything was okay with the ignition, but he checked the handbrake again. And he also wanted to make sure that everything was okay with the clutch pedal. After that, he invited me to the driver's seat. I had to sit on his lap because I was too little and it was quite a long distance between my feet and any of the pedals. So he took control over the pedals and the gear stick, and I was responsible for steering the wheel. That way we drove 20 kilometers and it was my first experience of driving a car. And it happened 2 months before I learned how to drive a two-wheeler. In upper classes, I got lucky and I got a chance to apply for a place in a driving school. I was enrolled after a very short interview, which I hadn't actually expected. The school was absolutely free. It was incredibly interesting to attend theoretical lessons as well as practical ones, but it was also really exhausting. I had to go there on some days after school and at weekends, so I didn't have any free time. Eventually, they taught me how to ride bikes and how to drive manual vehicles like cars, trucks, minivans. By the year 2030, I will have been driving for 30 years. I must have been very impressed by all those vehicles, and I got a little bit addicted to bikes and cars in general. And today I'm pretty sure that my parents should have bought me a motorbike when I got to university. If I had had enough real practice in different places, it would have been much easier and even safer to be able to switch between a car and a motorbike today. Nowadays I live in Moscow and I have been living here for more than 10 years. It's a very big city with a lot of crazy drivers from different regions and even countries. We don't have any rush hours here. It sometimes feels as if we have rush days. I've been driving Volkswagen Polo since 2017, but unfortunately I haven't been riding any bikes for more than 20 years. It sometimes really helps to have a car here, even a small one, but not always. I'm used to driving every day, but if I need to go to the city center in the middle of a working week, it's much more convenient to use public transport. The local underground is the easiest and the fastest ways to get around during the day. Instead of being stuck in a traffic jam for the half of the day, it can only take you 30 or 40 minutes to get to your destination. I'm often asked about this city and existing here. It may sound quite strange, but I'm still getting used to living in such cosmopolitan place like Moscow. Because, for example, the idea of commuting pops up more often than it used to happen in the past. At one age, you need some more action, and one day you also realize that it would be really cool to get some more fresh air as well. I would be really happy to stay here, but I would rather try to live between my work and cultural life in the city and my health and my very loud hobby out of the city. I play drums and my instrument needs a very specific and soundproof place for practicing and rehearsing, as well as appropriate means of transportation in case of concerts in the city and nearest towns. A motorbike would be perfect to be able to get to work, and a car would suffice to be able to get around with my instrument. Next month, I'm booking a series of practical lessons in a specialized motorbike school which has been recommended to me by one of my students. I just need to learn how to ride modern, powerful motorbikes. I'm going to improve my riding skills because I'm going to buy a modern adventure motorbike to be able to commute and to be able to travel. It's a 3-month course and I will have finished it by the end of October. In the winter, I'm going to test as many motorbikes as possible to get prepared for the next season. And I will probably have to buy some special clothes and some additional equipment to ride safely. It will also be necessary to renew my current car next year or in a year. If I buy a motorbike next spring, I will be able to sell my car immediately. That way I could have some time to start saving money for a new one. If everything was moving positively with my language school and my teaching career, I would be really happy to buy a little bit bigger and more powerful car. Nowadays, there are so many new brands with so many new makes on the market that it's not possible to plan to buy one specific car. I'm thinking about a car which resembles Volkswagen Tiguan or Audi Q3. I wish I didn't have any financial limitations to buy both of them and Lexus NX, which has always been my dream. But I had better stay sane. I should only spend my time and my money on something which I'm going to use in my everyday life. I don't need more. I wish I had made these dreams come true 10 years ago. I should have been more courageous. If I had planned that, I would have chosen a decent residential area in the city. I would have built a detached house in a beautiful area with a lot of trees. I would have done all needed driving and riding courses to be able to get around safely. And of course, if I had invested enough time and money in all of these things 10 years ago, I would have saved really a lot of time and money. Unfortunately, I didn't even have such thoughts at the time. I'd been taught to plan my work, and today I realized that I've never been taught to plan my life. I have to fix it. Так может звучать рассказ на тему «Машина» в рамках продвинутого уровня. Попробую целенаправленно добавить пассивные конструкции. Having moved a lot and having been able to live in a couple of different countries helped me to realize how cool my childhood was. I spent it in a very beautiful village which was more like a small town to me. It was surrounded by 400 hectares of different gardens which had been planted by a canning factory. Everything revolved around that factory. It could only exist thanks to all those workers who looked after the gardens, who did everything on time for a rich harvest, and of course, who distributed all the canned goods around a couple of regions. Being a child in such a cool place with such a big variety of different kinds of vehicles definitely made a huge impact on me. There were always really a lot of harvesters, tractors, minivans, trucks, lorries, and in addition to that, my father got a place of a driver in the local hospital. He has been an ambulance driver since I remember myself, and his garage, which was also a car repair shop, was one of my favorite playgrounds. At that time, he used to drive old Soviet minivans, which aren't produced nowadays, and today they can only be found in museums. The time of driving was equal to the time of repairing something, and that's why he was busy all the time. Buying privately owned vehicles wasn't popular at that time, and all holiday destinations used to be planned by employers and not by employees. That's why, on the one hand, what was the point of having a car, and on the other hand, it was just a vain dream for an ordinary person. I would usually come to the garage in the second part of the day when it wasn't so hot, and I was allowed to play with all those filthy car parts which were scattered around the place. I was only asked not to touch any electrical tools, and all the time I was there, I was wearing a kind of a uniform with gloves. But in general, I was treated as an adult and as a part of a team. I remember particularly one day, I was 6, it was summer, I came to the garage and my father was talking to some colleagues. I was standing in front of them and I was listening very carefully because they were having a conversation about cars. I was quiet, trying not to interrupt anyone with my endless questions, and they were laughing and talking about booking some car parts. It turned out my father had just repaired one old car and he was waiting for me so we could test it together. I got into the car and we set off. We had been driving for about 10 minutes when we finally got to a real agricultural field. There weren't any pedestrian areas, any cycle lanes, any traffic lights, any speed limits. It was a perfect place for a test drive. My father got out of the car, and while I was still sitting there, he was checking everything carefully. He checked every wheel. He opened the hood and checked the engine and then the exhaust system. Everything was okay with the ignition, but he checked the handbrake again. And he also wanted to make sure that everything was okay with the clutch pedal. After that, I was invited to the driver's seat, and I had to sit on his lap. As you understand, driving this car couldn't be performed by me properly because I was too little and it was quite a long distance between my feet and any of the pedals. Control over the pedals and gear stick was taken by him, and I was responsible for steering the wheel. That way we drove 20 kilometers, and it was my first experience of driving a car, and it happened 2 months before I was taught how to ride a two-wheeler. When I was in upper classes, I was told that there was a chance to apply for a free place in a driving school, and I did this immediately without thinking. There was a short interview which was conducted by my future instructor and his secretary, and after being enrolled, I started to attend all theoretical lessons as well as practical ones. The whole course was extremely interesting, but it was also really exhausting. I had to go there on some days after school and at weekends. All my free time was taken up by studying as much as possible about different means of transport. Eventually, we were taught how to ride bikes and how to drive manual vehicles like cars, minivans, and trucks. By the year 2030, I will have been driving for 30 years. I must have been very impressed by all those vehicles, and as a result, a kind of an addiction to bikes and cars was successfully developed. And today, I'm pretty sure that I should have got a motorbike from my parents when I got to university. If there had been enough real practice in different places, it would have been much easier and even safer to be able to switch between a car and a motorbike today. Nowadays, I live in Moscow, and I've been living here for more than 10 years. It's a very big city, which is also occupied by a lot of crazy drivers from different regions and even countries. Although the local road rules are published on a lot of governmental and private online platforms for free, they are hardly ever respected. On many streets, there are even CCTV cameras which are installed every 500 meters, and there are also a lot of people and a lot of silver spooners who enjoy breaking the rules in front of them just because they have a budget for paying fines. That's why it sometimes feels as if we don't have any rush hours here. We only have rush days. I've been driving Volkswagen Polo since 2017. Volkswagen used to have a factory here, and this car was produced in a town which is just a couple of hours away from Moscow. Besides that, they always had good financial programs, and they had a reputation of a car company which was able to provide good services on every stage of buying and maintaining any of their cars. It must have impressed me. Besides that, it was quite affordable, so I paid for it in cash. It's a pity they have left the market. I'm used to driving every day, but I wish I had a bike to be able to go to the city center whenever I need to do this in the middle of a working week. It's a torture to be stuck in a traffic jam during the day, especially in the summer. Such a time waste. The underground is usually preferred in such cases, and it's just the fastest way to get around during the day. Unfortunately, I don't have a motorbike at the moment, and I haven't been driving motorbikes for more than 10 years. I'm often asked about this city and living here. It may sound quite strange, but I'm still getting used to existing in this cosmopolitan place because, for example, the idea of commuting pops up more often than it used to happen in the past. At one age, you need some more action, and one day you also realize that it would be really cool to get some more fresh air as well. I would be really happy to stay here, but I would rather try to live between my work and cultural life in the city and my health and my very loud hobby out of the city. I play drums, and my instrument needs a very specific and soundproof place for practicing and rehearsing, as well as appropriate means of transportation in case of concerts in the city or nearest towns. A totally new infrastructure is being developed here so everyone could make this dream come true. Old roads are being made wider, old bridges are being reconstructed, and even old highways are being rebuilt. New residential areas appear in different districts every season. Old factories are being replaced by new, beautifully designed blocks of flats with a lot of green pedestrian areas. And new houses are being built non-stop in suburbs and on the outskirts of the city. I think in 20 years' time we will be living in a completely new place where pedestrians and drivers and drivers will be separated. Any kind of cars will be banned from the city center, and all those overcrowded residential areas will only be cycling or riding bikes and scooters there. So being able to commute by bike is actually a good idea. A motorbike would be perfect to be able to get to work, and a car would suffice to be able to get around with my instrument. Next month, I'm booking a series of practical lessons in a specialized motorbike school, which has been recommended to me by one of my students. I just need to learn how to ride modern, powerful motorbikes. I'm going to improve my riding skills because I'm going to buy a modern adventure motorbike to be able to commute and to be able to travel. It's a 3-month course, and I will have finished it by the end of October. In the winter, I'm going to test as many motorbikes as possible to get prepared for the next season. And to ride safely, I will probably have to buy some special clothes and some additional equipment, which is sold everywhere, in every bike store and even online. It can be delivered, but I'm used to trying everything on before buying. So I think I'll be discovering a lot of new places over the next year. It will also be necessary to renew my current car. If I buy a motorbike next spring, I will be able to sell my car immediately. That way I could have some time to start saving money for a new one. If everything was moving positively with my language school and my teaching career, I would be really happy to buy a little bit bigger and more powerful car. Nowadays, there are so many new brands with so many new makes on the market that it's not possible to plan to buy one specific car. I'm thinking about a car which resembles Volkswagen Tiguan or Audi Q3. I wish I didn't have any financial limitations to buy both of them and Lexus NX, which has always been my dream. But I had better stay sane. I should only spend my time and my money on something which I'm going to use in my real life. And honestly, if I had a chance to choose a car, I wouldn't buy none of those which are being advertised and can be bought everywhere. Nowadays, they are being produced with a lot of electronic parts that fail too often. It's crazy to have an electronic dashboard in our weather conditions. Their touch screens don't react on cold and wet hands, and it's quite dangerous to look for a needed option while driving. If I had a chance to choose, I would totally customize a car for me, and there would be as many manual things as possible so I could really control it. And this car would be really reliable. I wish I'd made these dreams come true 10 years ago. I should have been more courageous. If I'd planned that, I would have chosen a decent residential area in the city, and a beautiful flat has already been bought. I would have built a detached house in a beautiful area with a lot of trees, and a cool music studio would have been designed. I would have done all needed driving and riding courses to be able to drive and ride safely. And of course, if I'd invested enough time and money in all these things 10 years ago, a lot of time and money would have been saved. Unfortunately, I didn't have such thoughts at that time. I'd been taught to plan my work, and today I realize that I've never been taught to plan my life. I have to fix it. Сейчас в открытом доступе вы сталкиваетесь с действительно большим количеством примеров, где вам демонстрируют отдельные слова или фразы, где от вас ничего не требуют и говорят, что нужно заниматься минут по 15-20 в день, и при этом гарантируют какой-то результат. А так как такого контента очень много, то у вас формируются определенные ассоциации, которые, к сожалению, ничего общего не имеют с реальным практическим обучением и реально ощутимым результатом. Я довольно-таки часто сталкивался и все еще продолжаю сталкиваться с такой ситуацией. Ко мне обращается потенциальный студент или студентка с уже каким-то имеющимся уровнем, чаще всего начальным или средним. Я слушаю запрос, провожу тестирование, по результатам тестирования озвучиваю уровень, обозначаю сроки обучения и объемы самостоятельной работы. А студент или студентка не согласны ни с уровнем, ни с требуемыми от них объемами самостоятельной работы, и иногда даже график занятий их сразу же не устраивает. Такие люди часто начинают диалог с того, что они уже перепробовали 100 преподавателей или школ, и каждым из них остались недовольны, что они очень заняты, у них нет ни на что времени, но им нужен результат через месяц. И, кстати, результат, который они никогда не видели, и даже если бы увидели, то ничего бы не поняли. Я до сих пор не понимаю, как разговаривать с такими людьми. Мне в глаза смотрят взрослые, которые хотят самостоятельности, ничего самостоятельно не делая, и перекладывая всю ответственность на козла отпущения в виде какого-нибудь преподавателя, который от них еще что-то требует. Если вы заявляете, что у вас средний уровень, но вы разговариваете только в одном грамматическом времени, я прошу прощения, но у вас нет активного среднего уровня, поэтому это физически невозможно не только начать с него, но и двинуться дальше, на высшие уровни. Если вы заявляете, что у вас средний уровень, но вы все еще разговариваете максимально легким словарным запасом и не в состоянии воспроизвести двухминутный монолог на какую-нибудь обыденную тему, я прошу прощения, но у вас нет активного среднего уровня, поэтому это физически невозможно не только с него начать, но и двинуться дальше, на высшие уровни. Если вы заявляете, что у вас средний уровень, но у вас трудности с подбором словарного запаса при попытке изъясниться на какую-нибудь простую тему, вы постоянно сбиваетесь с мысли, прыгаете с темы на тему и говорите очень медленно, я прошу прощения, но у вас нет активного среднего уровня. Поэтому это физически невозможно не только начать с него, но и двинуться дальше на высшие уровни. Поймите, речь идет о практическом обучении, которое требует от вас своевременных физических действий в виде чтения, письма, прослушивания аудиокниг и просмотра учебных видеоматериалов. Я пока не встречал людей, которые были бы в состоянии за месяц физически не только прочитать 300 книг, но и устно их пересказать. Это физически невозможно. То, что такие люди запрашивают, звучит примерно так. Я хочу, чтобы моего ребенка лечил врач, который за пару месяцев окончил медицинский институт. Я хочу, чтобы дом, где живет моя семья, построил строитель, который за пару месяцев освоил программу строительного университета. Я хочу лететь со своей семьей в отпуск, но чтобы за штурвалом самолета обязательно сидел летчик, который за месяц успел освоить теорию и достаточно попрактиковался со взлетом, посадкой и всеми потенциально возможными нештатными ситуациями в воздухе. Я очень надеюсь, что аналогия понятна. Учитесь следовать рекомендациям, чтобы перейти к реальным физическим действиям. Когда это случится, будет и легко, и интересно. Прогресс может быть ощутим только после личного опыта, который приобретается в ходе практического обучения с преподавателем и в ходе выполнения определенных объемов самостоятельной работы. Что же делают люди, которым нужен результат, но которые искренне не понимают, чего конкретно от них потребует достижение этого результата? Все просто. Помимо того, что они начинают физически регулярно ходить на занятия, они начинают следовать простым рекомендациям, которые культивируют желаемый результат в маленьких объемах с самого начала обучения. То есть, пройдя определенный учебный объем, сначала теоретически, а потом практически, они приступают к маленьким объемам письма, что происходит самостоятельно и благодаря чему они закрепляют пройденный материал и физически учатся самостоятельно писать, когда их никто не контролирует. Затем они приступают к чтению адаптированной литературы, составленной носителями, которую они тоже читают самостоятельно, когда над душой никто не стоит. В данной литературе они находят подтверждение всему тому грамматическому материалу, который они прошли, а благодаря большому разнообразию контекстов, которые, кстати, можно выбирать, у них появляется то необходимое количество практики и самостоятельной работы, которое знакомит их с теми контекстами и словарным запасом, которых не было на занятиях, что впоследствии убивает тот самый страх говорить вне занятий. Затем такие студенты понимают, чего физически стоит достижение того или иного результата, и тут ровно два варианта развития событий. Либо спустя пару месяцев просят прощения и честно говорят, что не потянут, осознав реальные объемы работы, и прекращают обучение. Либо же радуются полученным результатам, хотят идти дальше, и самое главное, они начинают адаптировать пройденный материал в реальной жизни. Вот пример. Меня нанимает рекламный отдел одной известной японской компании, офис которой находился в Москве. У ребят уже есть какой-то уровень, и они начинают заниматься со мной. На занятиях мы быстренько структурируем уже полученные знания и по возможности начинаем двигаться дальше. Помимо занятий, они начинают трудиться самостоятельно и выполнять порционно все, о чем прошу. Спустя какое-то время они говорят, что к ним приезжают японцы по поводу рекламного бюджета на следующий год, и они хотели бы выступить на английском. Легко. На тот момент они уже бегали по пройденным временам, и у них получалось бегло идти из прошлого через настоящее в будущее связано. Единственное, что мы поменяли, так это временное соотношение между прошлым, настоящим и будущим. 5% времени было посвящено отчету за прошлый год и описанию нынешнего положения вещей, а 95% времени было посвящено бизнес-планированию на следующий год. То есть они в итоге рассказали, как был реализован прошлогодний рекламный бюджет, упомянули, что было так, что было не так. Потом перешли к описанию нынешнего положения вещей, а это был как раз тот год, когда здесь валюта улетела в облака, и они объяснили, что стратегии прошлого уже не сработают, и предложили отказаться от многих каналов продвижения их продукции, и в первую очередь от многих печатных изданий, которые по прогнозам просто закроются. А переходя в будущее, они предложили сосредоточиться на продвижении онлайн, на телевидении и на наружной рекламе. И вот этому они посвятили 95% времени, рассказывая подробно, что хотят сделать в каждый из кварталов. Таким образом, они прошли путь от того момента, когда им нужна была помощь со стороны, до того момента, когда благодаря своим личным действиям они стали абсолютно самостоятельны и были в состоянии справиться с любой профессиональной задачей. Я очень надеюсь, что приведенные примеры были полезны, и это поможет вам получить представление о возможных результатах практического языкового образования. Для тех, кто не понял английские примеры, я позже расскажу о лексической и грамматической наполняемости каждого уровня, и вы точно поймете разницу между ними.